bumps, yeah. And they're let's get it straight. They're not the ones saying anything about Brock. This is all Jericho's thoughts on it.
Right.
Obviously, he's probably not a fan of Brock's work and of him personally more than anything, probably. But yeah, those were some brutal looking throws and suplexes and just tosses that Orton was doing during that feud as well. But yeah, I mean Brock's a beast, man, and he did his thing on Daniel Bryan in this one, and yeah, it was a little disturbing because at this point when you're watching it live, you don't know how long this beating and shellacking is going to take before, or if at all, because you know that he dominated John Cena throughout the whole main event match, I believe at SummerSlam where he won that the title when he came back. But yeah, at some point Daniel Bryan had to get the upper hand so they could have a competitive match, and I think right at that point the match got really, really good, which means it was a back and forth contest. They were doing some cool stuff, and yeah, I think then it became a match that you really wanted to see what they were going and doing, and this I think was a bucket list match for Daniel Bryan. Personally, I think he didn't care. He knew he was going to take the suplexes from Brock Lesnar, but I think he wanted to have that match, maybe to just because he's a tough guy. But Daniel Bryan, there's nobody questioning his toughness. I think he wanted to test Brock. I think he wanted to see what the man was made of, how tough was wrestling Brock, and he wanted to know for himself. And I give Daniel Bryan all the balls in the world, man. He took all those suplexes like a champ, and he gave us a great match. At the end of the day, he gave us everything he had, and it was an entertaining match at least.
To make the match credible, to your point, Jester, the only feasible way to have Daniel Bryan the size of Brock Lesnar's pec make it look like he's even has a fighting chance was exactly how he did it, and that was a swift kick to the balls. Because I don't care how big you are, that hurts bad. And I mean, that was the only way that Daniel Bryan could make it believable. Like he has a fighting chance was to do that. And to your point, MC, after that point, the match then became competitive, which, then the match was pretty entertaining. Ultimately, though, we have Brock Lesnar, of course, hitting the F5 on Daniel Bryan to ultimately put the final nail in SmackDown's coffin. 6-0.
6-0 what?
Raw win.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't understand where they're going with this because, they basically just reestablished that Raw is a superior brand, and I don't know. It really, if you're a SmackDown fan, you certainly can't be happy after this one-sided affair. So,
do you really think that there's fans out there that are like one-sided or not? I mean, do you think there's fans out there that watch just Raw and not watch SmackDown, or they just watch SmackDown and not Raw? Do you think that's really how this two shows during a week is really panning out for fans, or do you think that it's just kind of that the wrestling fans watch wrestling no matter what?
I think the latter, for sure. I mean, fans are smart enough to know that Raw and SmackDown are both products of WWE, so there's not really a division. And honestly, there's not really any real metrics to base this competition between the shows on. So I think a lot of fans prefer to watch SmackDown simply because it's 2 hours instead of 3 hours. 3 hours is way too much for a wrestling program.
Yeah, I think I don't know if there's the brand loyalty that maybe WWE would like, so they don't really care. But there are certain fans, that probably like the blue brand better than Raw because I think Raw is just too long and oversaturated, so they like the fact that SmackDown is only 2 hours. But me personally, I mean, I don't know if that has partial to do with it because the writing is going to be tighter. But a lot more of my favorites are on SmackDown now anyway. So, so I think there is a little bit of a brand bias. I mean, for me personally watching it, I would rather SmackDown won, but I know doesn't matter anyways. It's whatever they want to have happen. But, I would at least want to see SmackDown perform a little better. I mean, a clean sweep does nothing for the other show. I mean, I don't know how you keep that show looking good when you just make them all look like a bunch of losers.
Do you think that are they still doing the draft? Are they still doing that where they change change nights and being on different brands? Are they still doing that?
After WrestleMania, yeah. So it's still a ways away before they do the next draft. That'll be after WrestleMania next year.
The only thing that makes sense to me with the whole clean sweep deal is they're not going to do the brand split anymore. Like eventually at one point in time, both superstars are just going to go back and forth again. That's the only logical sense I can make out of it.
Yeah, but they're rumored not to do that because the supposed rumor is Fox wants their own superstars on their own show to promote, and the rumor is that that's not going to happen.
Yeah, the whole Fox thing definitely adds quite a twist to it, and I'm wondering how the higher ups at Fox, who just spent millions and millions of dollars for the SmackDown product, feels after watching that. They obviously can't be happy. It's like, gee, we just spent millions and millions of dollars, and all of our guys suck. You just made our show
what they're saying. So yeah, not sure where they're going with it. I mean, if you're using that clean sweep to further a point of Baron Corbin keeps his job on Raw because of it, that seems really silly. And they're trying to turn The Miz and Shane McMahon into a team, or maybe adversaries eventually at WrestleMania. I guess we got to see the bigger picture at the end of the day when this plays out. But as of right now, it just doesn't seem like it's number one, makes sense. Number two, definitely they're not doing it in a way that's as entertaining as it could be. It's certainly a one-sided affair in a once-a-year pay-per-view where you quote-unquote establish brand supremacy. When you end at 6-0, one side should have been 7, whatever. If they would have the show go the way they wanted it to. Certainly seems very silly to me.
Yeah, I don't get it. I really don't. It just didn't make any sense to me, the whole thing. But I guess we'll see. I just hope that this is one of those things that WWE just doesn't forget about and, go by the wayside, and they just continue trucking on like they usually do.
So speaking of that, so you guys are being wrestling fans and been watching it for a long time, I'm assuming. Like, how long have you been watching it, MC? When's the last? Can you think back to the very first time you watched professional wrestling?
Oh, it's introduced to it. This is pretty funny because introduced it by my older brother, who's just 4 years older than me. He doesn't really watch at all, and hadn't since he basically turned into a teenager and in adulthood. I just stayed, much like a loyal, a lot of time. Just maybe to the nature of how I'm built as a loyalist and stuff too. I always enjoyed it. It got me through a lot of tough times and bad times, and just.
But when were you a fan though? Were you a fan back in the day when it was like Saturday morning wrestling, or when did you actually remember? Like, what was the very first?
I could tell you the first pay-per-view that I got my dad to order would have been WrestleMania 4. So 3 wasn't even available to us. But
so before that, though, you were a fan when they were having like George the Animal Steel and stuff like that.
The Hulk Hogan era, which I think is what really somehow the Rocky and maybe that much may have attracted my brother, which in turn then I became watching it through him because I'm a little kid at that point. So being very influential in that sense. Yeah, I watched it. There he when I became old enough to go to the events I did, I always watched them. Forced my dad to watch it on Monday nights when it became that later on, but. We Saturday mornings for sure, all the time. That would be wrestling. I'd record them and record my favorites and stuff. And we'd put after the pay-per-views, I'd record stuff from the shows and stuff. So for a long time. I mean, better part of most of my life I've watched. So but I think I had the benefit of growing up in a golden age of wrestling. I think.
So Rocky, what would be the earliest time you remember watching professional wrestling?
The earliest I remember was it was Hulk Hogan versus the Ultimate Warrior at I believe it was WrestleMania 5 or 6 or something.
6, 1990.
Yeah, I had been a huge Hulk Hogan fan prior to that. I was just a kid, but that's when I always tell everyone that's when I became like a huge fan of pro wrestling. And yes, I cried when the Warrior beat Hogan.
Wow. My brother was a Hogan mark, and he loved him, and I was cheering for the Warriors. So yeah.
That's funny because my brother was a Warrior mark, and he was so happy and rubbing it in my face, and I was just bawling. No, Hulk Hogan, no!
I didn't blow, but I felt like it was Warriors' time, and I just remember that as a kid at that point in time that this was the Warriors. I didn't
understand the business. I still thought it was real at that point in time.
Shit, yeah.
I was like, Hulk Hogan, my hero, just lost. No.
So now that you're in an area where you are now, and wrestling's been going on for such a long time, how do you see it changing or evolving? Do you think it's evolving to a good area of wrestling? Like, do you think it's still carrying on the tradition of what you remember as a child, or do you think that it's kind of gotten off the path and changed to where, to me, it seems a little bit more Hollywood, and it seems like it's become more about pay-per-views? And because when I used to watch wrestling, all of the matches usually got settled on, the night the show. Like, whenever there was a beef, they had that match, and then it was over. They didn't say, well, you tune in to pay-per-view and watch it there. And the only pay-per-view I actually watched, MC, was the night I watched the pay-per-view of, I think it was the pay-per-view when Owen Hart died. And that's the one. What was that? Yeah. So yeah. I remember wrestling way back before that, when they used to have, it wasn't even WWE, it was that other wrestling federation that they would show, and it had Ric Flair on there, but it also had like Gorgeous whatever and those guys, and it would seem kind of cheesy, and it looked like it was in a bingo hall, kind of how ECW was. And I remember watching that as a kid, and I really didn't get into it either until they started having more characters that were more relatable for us to be like, hey, we want to be a part of, we want to be a superhero like, Hulk Hogan. Yeah. And then I think everybody really got into wrestling when Hulk Hogan appeared on Rocky IV and Rocky III. And when he appeared on that's when everybody was like, who the hell is this guy? Thunder Lips. And then they get into professional wrestling. Then it kind of built that whole character up. But I start looking at wrestling now, and I think that the reason I'm kind of turned off from it is it just seems like it's just kind of more focused on storyline, getting you to get a hold of you so you watch the pay-per-views. And there's so many pay-per-views now. It's almost one a week. And I think it's losing its tradition. I think it's turning more to like a Hollywood deal. And I was looking at some old videos of back in the Attitude Era, which I think is the best. When I talked to Mick Foley, bring back that name, we were discussing in the green room one time when I performed with him. He asked me which era I liked the best about wrestling. I said the Attitude Era. I thought that was the most entertaining because there was so much going on. It was risque, and it was kind of some of it was adult content, some of it was for kids, and it really kind of hit all of the spectrum. But now I think it's like walking a fine line, and it's not even risky anymore. And that's why when they had the Ronda Rousey match and it got a little bloody or things were going on, that's where you're like, dude, this is what wrestling used to be like. I want to see tables and chairs. I want to see violence. This is why I watch wrestling, and I watch it so I can see superhuman strength out there, and people do things that that you really want to see, almost like they're stuntmen. They're all stuntmen, and they're performing. And I think it's kind of getting away from that. And so I was just wondering where you guys come from as watching wrestling back when you're in there. Do you still find it as entertaining, or do you still find it as the same as it was when you were younger? I know you're not younger, but do you still find it the same entertainment, or now do you sit there and you kind of think, you know what, it's kind of lost its impact on me as a fan? Yeah,
it's luster. Is that what you're looking for? Yeah, I'll let Rock go after I do. I'll try to sum it up. I think it's just evolution. It's a PG product for one. It's a publicly traded company owned by certain restrictions, so they can kind of push the envelope a little bit when they want to, but they're not really going to go that far because it's all about the bottom dollar. It's a company. They're trying to make that money, so it is what it is. It always has been. It's built off of marks, basically people who want to watch two play fight. And and it's not to belittle it, because I wouldn't use the F word, because that is degrading to anybody who's participated in the business. But